Okay, so for those of you who are learning astrology or who are interested in the symbolism rooted in astrology, we have a fantastic living example using this lunar eclipse and the extremely tragic incident that just occurred at the Michigan High School. So let's take a look at the correlations here because it's pretty interesting. So, looking at the blueprint of the event with Ethan Crumley, his parents, the Michigan High School, and the state response to it under this 12-degree Sagittarius lunar eclipse, there are some interesting correlations. We know that this eclipse in Sagittarius, which is ruled by Jupiter in Aquarius this time, it's also flanked by Mars and Saturn. Now, here's a breakdown of where everything connects. And make a note, this is not a complete and absolute list of rulerships for these planets or signs, but we're taking specific items from this list that apply here. All right, so first thing, remember that Mars and Saturn that flanks the eclipse that we were talking about? Well, Mars and Saturn together rule guns. Mars rules or represents aggression, penetration, assault, war, and Saturn is iron, steel, metals, and engineering. Together, this is also known as guns. Make a note that Mars and Saturn can also rule blades or knives, but in this particular case, it's fitting that this is a firearms issue because Mars is in Taurus, which represents ambitious greed. And for an interesting note, see the story about the Winchester Mystery House. And that is the Winchester guns and the dynasty, or not dynasty, the fortune left behind by the Winchester family from their sale of guns. It's the house. It's an interesting story. I'll put the link below in the description box. Now, also with that, Saturn is in Aquarius, and Saturn in Aquarius rules, among many things, the fringe elements of society, outcasts, social responsibilities, or the rules of society, collective consciousness being taken to task, right and wrong in terms of self versus society, and, questions of who do we protect ourselves from and why. Now, with that, Jupiter in Aquarius, which rules this eclipse, also rules, Jupiter in Aquarius itself, rules, ready? Crazy people. But in this particular case, we can also use a different word for it, which would be feral or untamed, wild, uncivilized, non-domesticated, as well as wild, unusual, and unexpected events. So mass shootings in schools should be, or is and should be, an unusual event at all times. Unfortunately, more commonplace now in this country than ever, and certainly across the globe. But more important, the involvement of the parents leading up to this event and the state of Michigan choosing to prosecute the parents along with the youth, Ethan, is also unexpected and unusual. So this is both of these things, along with Ethan, the shooter, are completely unpredictable, unexpected. Like nobody saw this coming. Well, at least not in our imaginations, right? So the other thing is that those two parents trying to run for the hills the minute they realized that they were going to be prosecuted and abandoning their child in the process, leaving him with law enforcement while they're off trying to escape the long arm of the law. That is also an indication of a feral character, right? Uncivilized, operating outside of the bounds of society, or like an animal level living. Or, Jupiter Aquarius, because this is what it's showing us, could also represent someone simply being batshit crazy. But we're still waiting for a verdict on those two parents about which this is, maybe a combination of both. Now, Jupiter also rules groups. Aquarius rules youth. Because who else but teenagers and young adults can embody the boundary pushing, rule breaking, and testing the uncharted waters with the enthusiasm and ease as teenagers? And yes, I know Leo, the sign, typically rules teenagers, but so does Aquarius. So for every Izod wearing preppy out there, there's also a mohawk sporting, safety pin wearing punk rocker, Aquarius as their complement because, it's all about balance in the universe. So Jupiter in Aquarius also rules society in the future. Jupiter and Saturn both rule society, but Jupiter is where the individual principles and ethics define our participation in society. Jupiter represents our personal ethics and belief systems, okay? Among other things. Saturn is where the social rules and the collective agreements of the group define and create structures we must adhere to in order to be part of that society. Jupiter here represents the impulse to expand, and in Aquarius, our impulse to expand and push our boundaries or ourselves past the limits of the society we're surrounded by, hence the symbolism of Ethan and his parents. Now, note that Saturn in Aquarius shows the limitation and penalties we must face when we put ourselves first and ignore the rules and needs of the society we share with others. Saturn is in Aquarius right now, and Saturn symbolizes the state of Michigan's response to this horrific event by putting Ethan's parents squarely on trial with him for their support and participation in the creation of this tragedy, using their son as a proxy for their issues and conflicts about society. Right? Okay, now, the eclipse. A new moon eclipse always rings the bell for new major cycles starting that are visibly in effect for about 6 months after the eclipse date. Now, mind you, eclipses are in effect and have impact much further out than that. These are super new moons and super full moons. But for that 6-month window immediately following the eclipse, it's a time of heightened sensitivity to different triggering events that set things in motion, or like the snowball, rolling down the hill. So the charges leveled against the parents are both unprecedented and represent a major turning point in the collective consciousness about our tolerance of mass murder of our youth in schools because of specifically parents and individuals who are upholding their Second Amendment rights to purchase whatever they want for whatever reason they want as being more important than the lives of the youth who will now never see adulthood. The Winchester Mystery House may very well be child's play compared to what the leaders of the NRA and the supporting politicians will be facing when this is all over and the reckoning arrives on their doorstep for all of this. Time and karma will not be kind if it takes that long to catch up with them, because it will accrue interest until then. The Sagittarius eclipse at 12 degrees 22 minutes, the Sagittarius eclipse is at 12 degrees 22 minutes of Sagittarius. Now, this is an Aries decadent and an Aries duad, which further underscores the Mars energy in this eclipse, which we just said flanks the eclipse with its antecedent to Saturn. So rather than having a happy, lucky, jovial Sagittarius-Jupiter eclipse or a Saturnine, principled, disciplined eclipse, that, if that were the case, would have suggested military or police emphasis in events. Instead, we have a Martian eclipse, and we saw Mars in one of its worst expressions: assault, attack, combat, gratuitous violence, the urge to conquer at all costs, penetration, because bullets penetrate, and cutting through and or burning. Because if you didn't know this, bullets not only cut skin and flesh as they enter, they also burn the tissue as it passes through. Mars also rules young men. Saturn rules older men. And what we have is, again, a young man with Mars-Saturn issues on center stage for this disaster. Mars-Saturn also rules issue of masculine identity, insecurity, fear, and parental or father issues, by the way. So while the mother here in this particular situation with Ethan is very much the key figure in this kid's poor parenting leading to these choices, the father is a bigger issue, and currently what information we do have point to the father being an impotent partner in his marriage to Ethan's mother, Ethan's mother, his second wife, along with a history of being an absentee or irresponsible father prior to this, with the mother of his other child. Now, do note that it is also a Mars-Saturn expression, this impotence, which is also another way of saying powerlessness. So, where is the mother in this planetary picture since she's integral and visibly complicit in creating this situation? Well, look to the moon in the lunar eclipse. The moon, or mother figure, is overshadowing or dominating the sun, the father figure, rendering him impotent. Remember, the sun has no power if its light is blocked, which means that it's impotent or powerless. And it's almost conjunct the south node. In fact, the sun, moon, and Mercury, or youth, are all nestled together tightly in the configuration, suggesting that in many ways, Ethan and his parents were an island unto themselves, tightly joined in unity and identity. The south node there further isolates them from the world around them. The difference between the south and the north node is the south node is our past and our history and our previous lifetimes, if you believe in past lives. And it's a very isolating, withdrawn energy. The north node pushes you out into the world to deal with new and novel people and things. So being in the world and among it is one of the things that's associated with the north node. Okay. Now, with all of them joined together in this tight little island they might have been living on, this does not bode well for Ethan, because everything he knows and understands about who he is and how to function in the world, and what he's learned at this point, appears to exclusively come from these two adults. So while his identity isn't completely formed yet, I mean, he isn't finished the process yet, he's still in high school, it has certainly been halted and will be stunted by his upcoming stay in prison, where he will not have better role models to work with. Could we have seen all of this using this symbolism before now? Doubtful. One of the amazing things about the stars is that they give us a coded language to decipher an evolutionary call to action. It's not the mundane or earthly event that matters as much as the demand on us psychologically and spiritually that underlies the event we are being called to examine and work through. The physical expression of the planets in their aspects are small details, like the color of a vehicle. They're not as important when you compare it to the importance of the direction the vehicle is moving and what type of vehicle it is. So the actual physical manifestations of what an eclipse or planetary aspects promise us, like the specific details, are not as important as the underlying evolutionary message underneath that we're being required to face and deal with, recognize, and work through. So it's not like a psychic prediction or Sylvia Brown where we're like, oh, and the license plate number is, and it was a blue shirt and a black Cadillac. It's not like those are details, and they're not the important part of the message. There are some big differences between psychic work and astrology. All right. So this incident is another clarion call for people to put their self-absorbed and self-pitying heads, pull their self-absorbed and self-pitying heads out of their asses and put youth and children first when it comes to societal demands. If anyone thought that the problem with wholesale and mass murder of our youth was exclusive to troubled young men and a lone wolf mentality, then this incident has certainly pulled the veil of fantasy away from that. The troubled young man with a lone wolf mentality is only the trigger mechanism on a gun. The problem is much larger than just him, and the entire thing needs to be dismantled and melted into obsolescence. Enough is enough. We have got to stop excusing and ignoring the wholesale mass murders of our youth in support of Second Amendment rights and this fantasy that the Second Amendment allows us to purchase any kind of gun whenever we want for whatever reason without any restrictions or boundaries. Our children matter more.